Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Asheville, North Carolina. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you are watching from and the exact time at which you are listening to this narration. We are interested in knowing to which places and at what times of day or night these documented stories reach. The Blue Ridge Mountains keep secrets. Locals will tell you that. The valleys and hollows hide things from sunlight, and when night falls across western North Carolina, those secrets grow teeth. But few secrets have remained as carefully guarded as what occurred in the shadow of Mount Mitchell in 1844. The events that unfolded there have been systematically erased from official records, mentioned only in fragments of journals, church registries, and whispered stories passed through generations of mountain families. The story begins with a slave auction in Charleston, South Carolina. According to documents preserved in the Charleston County Historical Archives, a man identified only as male slave, 25 years, literate, troublesome, was purchased by Jonathan Caldwell, a wealthy plantation owner from Buncombe County, North Carolina. The sale record, dated January 17, 1843, notes that the man was sold at a surprisingly low price due to prior attempts at organizing fellow slaves and dangerous ideas. The slave's name, according to a small notation in the corner of the document, was Isaiah Brooks. Caldwell owned 3,000 acres of prime farmland, approximately 17 miles northeast of Asheville. His property extended into what is now the Pisgah National Forest, a wild, densely wooded area that climbs steeply into the mountains. The main house stood where the Bull Creek Road now intersects with the Blue Ridge Parkway. Nothing remains of it today, not a foundation stone, not a fence post, as if it were deliberately and completely erased. The Caldwell plantation produced tobacco, corn, and raised livestock. It was considered modestly successful, though not among the largest in the region. What made it unusual was its remote location, pushing up against the wilderness of the mountains. According to tax records from 1843, Caldwell owned 27 slaves, making his operation substantial for the western North Carolina region, where slavery was less prevalent than in the flatter eastern parts of the state. Upon Isaiah's arrival at the plantation, he was assigned to field work, according to the plantation's work ledger, which was discovered in 1959 during renovations of the Asheville County Courthouse basement. The ledger, which covers only January through April of 1843, notes multiple instances of discipline required for the new slave. The final entry regarding Isaiah states, "Reassigned to mountain operation by master's orders." The mountain operation, as it was called, was a separate enterprise located approximately 7 miles further into the mountains from the main plantation. According to local historical accounts collected by Dr. Harold Winters of the University of North Carolina in 1962, this operation consisted of a small timber harvesting camp and what was officially described as a hunting lodge owned by Caldwell. The actual nature of this remote outpost remains disputed. The hunting lodge was located near what is now the Craggy Gardens area, an isolated spot even by today's standards. In 1843, it would have been nearly cut off from civilization, accessible only by a narrow trail that wound through some of the most treacherous terrain in the Appalachians. According to Dr. Winters' research, only 6 slaves were stationed at this remote outpost, all men, all chosen specifically by Caldwell himself. It was here, in the mountain operation, that Isaiah Brooks would spend the next 15 months of his life. And it was here that something happened that the local authorities, the church, and several prominent families have worked for generations to erase from public memory. What exactly occurred at the hunting lodge between January 1843 and April 1844 is preserved only in fragments. A letter from Jonathan Caldwell to his brother in Richmond, dated October 1843, mentions, "The mountain venture proves more profitable than anticipated, though requires my personal attention more frequently than is convenient. The new man shows unexpected aptitude." The new man was presumably Isaiah Brooks, though the nature of his aptitude is not specified. Another letter, dated December of the same year, suggests growing tension. "Troubling reports from the upper camp. Must investigate after the Christmas holiday. Wilson suggests abandonment of the enterprise, but the profits cannot be ignored." Wilson appears to have been James Wilson, Caldwell's overseer, whose own diary was discovered in a collection of family papers donated to the Asheville Historical Society in 1958. Wilson's diary contains only a few entries related to the mountain operation, but they are revealing in their brevity and evident discomfort. An entry from January 1844 reads, "Returned from the upper camp. Advised Mr. C to shut it down immediately. Some things should not be pursued, regardless of profit. The men up there are changed, the new one most of all. Mr. C will not listen." The next reference comes from the diary of Elizabeth Caldwell, Jonathan's wife. In an entry dated March 12, 1844, she writes, "J returned from the mountains again. He does not sleep, paces the floors until dawn, will not speak of what troubles him, says only that Isaiah has become indispensable. I fear for his soul." The following week, according to records in the First Presbyterian Church of Asheville, Jonathan Caldwell met privately with Reverend Thomas McNeil for several hours. The church record simply notes, "Counsel provided to J. Caldwell regarding business matters of a troubling moral nature." On April 3, 1844, Jonathan Caldwell rode alone to the mountain camp. According to James Wilson's diary, Caldwell left before dawn, refused any accompaniment, and told Wilson, "I will resolve the situation permanently." He never returned to the main plantation. What happened next exists primarily in oral histories collected from descendants of the area's inhabitants and in a series of official reports that seem deliberately obscure. According to a report filed by the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office, dated April 17, 1844, a search party was dispatched to locate Jonathan Caldwell after he failed to return from his mountain property. The report is sparse in details, but indicates that upon arrival at the hunting lodge, they found it abandoned. The report contains this cryptic line, "No signs of struggle or violence observed. Lodge in order, but empty of persons. Unusual arrangements of furniture and artifacts noted. Search of surrounding area revealed no bodies or evidence of flight." The sheriff's report might have been the end of the official record, were it not for a private letter written by Deputy Sheriff William Garrison to his cousin in Tennessee, which surfaced in a collection of family papers in 1965. In this letter, Garrison describes what the official report omitted. "What we found in that place haunts my sleep." The lodge was indeed intact, but arranged like no white man's dwelling I've ever seen. Furniture positioned in circular patterns, strange markings carved into the door frames. In the master's bedroom, we found what appeared to be a throne constructed from the headboard of his bed, adorned with feathers, animal teeth, and strips of cloth. The slaves' quarters were empty of personal effects. Most disturbing was the ledger we found on what had been Caldwell's desk. It contained entries in a refined hand that could only have been written by someone with education. The final entry read, "The kingdom of the high place is established this day. Master has been instructed in proper servitude. We ascend further to where none will find us." No signature, but the hand matches writing identified as belonging to the slave Isaiah. Garrison's letter continues to describe how the search party expanded their hunt into the higher elevations, but found no trace of the 6 slaves or Caldwell. He notes, The mountains above the lodge are exceptionally treacherous, with sheer cliffs and dense forest. If they ascended further, as the journal suggested, they would have reached areas virtually impenetrable to any but the most experienced woodsman. Several miles higher, there are caves and rock formations where, I am told, entire groups could conceal themselves from detection. The official search for Jonathan Caldwell and the missing slaves continued for 3 weeks before being abandoned. According to the final sheriff's report, dated May 12, 1844, it was concluded that J. Caldwell and property have met with fatal accident or fled to parts unknown. Elizabeth Caldwell, however, was not satisfied with this explanation. Church records indicate that she approached Reverend McNeil again, insisting that her husband had shared troubling information with him before his disappearance. According to a private letter from McNeil to Bishop James Ives of the Episcopal Diocese of North Carolina, the Reverend refused to divulge the content of his conversation with Jonathan Caldwell, citing pastoral confidentiality. The letter, discovered in the diocesan archives in 1966, contains this disturbing passage. Mrs. Caldwell grows increasingly distressed and makes allegations of a most disturbing and fantastical nature regarding her husband's mountain enterprise. She claims that Mr. C. had confided that the slave Isaiah had developed some manner of unholy influence over the other slaves, and possibly over Mr. C. himself. Her suggestion that rituals of an unseemly nature were being conducted at the hunting lodge is too absurd and racially inflammatory to credit. I have counseled her to accept her widowhood with Christian dignity. Elizabeth Caldwell did not accept her presumed widowhood quietly. According to records from the Buncombe County Court, she petitioned in June 1844 for a specialized search party to be formed, funded at her own expense. Her petition was denied. The judge's decision cites the impracticality of the requested search and the delicate condition of the petitioner's mind. By August 1844, Elizabeth Caldwell had taken matters into her own hands. She hired a group of men from Tennessee who had experience tracking fugitive slaves in difficult terrain. No official record of this expedition exists, but its outcome is referenced in a letter from Elizabeth to her sister in Richmond, dated September 20, 1844. The men have returned with disturbing news. They found no trace of Jonathan, but discovered what they described as a settlement of sorts, established in a nearly inaccessible valley high on the north face of the mountain. They observed from a distance what appeared to be rudimentary shelters and the movement of several individuals. When they attempted to approach closer, they were driven back by rifle fire. 2 of their party were wounded. They are certain that what they found was the missing slaves, but insist there were more individuals than the original 6. They reported seeing at least 10 people moving about the camp. The authorities refused to mount an official expedition, citing the dangerous terrain and the approaching winter season. They suggest I accept my husband's death and allow the matter to rest. I cannot. Winter came early to the mountains in 1844. By mid-October, the higher elevations were already experiencing snowfall, making any further expeditions impossible. Elizabeth Caldwell, according to church records, began to withdraw from social life. Entries in the visitation log of Reverend McNeil indicate that she refused to leave her house and spoke increasingly of voices carried on the wind from the mountains and Jonathan's cries in the night. The winter of 1844 to 1845 was unusually harsh. When spring finally came to the North Carolina mountains, Elizabeth Caldwell was dead. The official cause, as recorded in the church burial registry, was fever of the brain. She was interred in the Riverside Cemetery in Asheville, though her grave marker has long since disappeared. With Elizabeth's death, official interest in the fate of Jonathan Caldwell and his missing slaves seemingly ended. The plantation was sold to cover debts, the slaves were auctioned, and the mountain property was abandoned to the wilderness. Yet the story did not end there. Throughout the summer and fall of 1845, settlers in the most remote parts of Buncombe and Yancey counties began to report unusual occurrences. According to an article in the Highland Messenger newspaper, dated August 1845, several families reported items missing from clotheslines and storage sheds, primarily tools, clothing, and preserved food. More disturbing were reports of observers spotting groups of colored men moving through the forests at dawn and dusk in areas where no free black communities were known to exist. By November 1845, these reports had become concerning enough that the local militia was mustered to investigate. Their report, filed with the county clerk's office and discovered during archival research in 1963, describes an inconclusive search of the high country, but notes evidence of temporary encampments found at multiple locations, always above 5,000 feet elevation. Signs suggest occupants move frequently between sites. Discovered crude forge and metalworking implements at one site, indicating capability to repair and possibly manufacture tools and weapons. The report concludes with a recommendation that regular patrols be established in the affected areas. However, a note appended by the county commissioner rejects this recommendation, citing insufficient county resources for extended mountain operations and the minimal nature of the reported thefts. Local landowners advised to remain vigilant and report any direct confrontations. The following spring, a surveying party mapping timber resources in what is now the Black Mountain Range encountered something unexpected. According to the private journal of Charles Webber, the lead surveyor, the party discovered a cleared area approximately 2 acres in size on a relatively flat section of ridge at an elevation of nearly 6,000 feet. The journal, which remained in the possession of the Webber family until being donated to the Pack Memorial Library in 1961, describes the site. Upon the clearing stood 7 cabins of solid construction, arranged in a circular pattern around a central structure larger than the rest. The craftsmanship was remarkable, utilizing stone foundations and well-fitted logs with roofs of split shingles. Most surprising was a small water wheel constructed on a spring-fed stream that appeared to power some manner of mechanical saw. The settlement was unoccupied when we discovered it, though evidence suggested recent habitation. Most disturbing was what we found in the central building, a chair constructed of finely worked wood, elevated on a platform and adorned with carvings of an unfamiliar design. Before it stood what can only be described as an altar of stacked stones. Upon this altar rested a human skull. Webber does not identify the skull, but his description of a distinctive gold tooth in the upper jaw matches dentistry work known to have been performed on Jonathan Caldwell, according to medical receipts found among Elizabeth's personal papers after her death. The surveying party reported their discovery to authorities in Asheville, but by the time a sheriff's expedition reached the site 3 weeks later, they found it abandoned and partially dismantled. According to their report, it appeared the settlement had been deliberately taken apart by its inhabitants, with usable materials carried away. Throughout 1846 and 1847, similar reports surfaced across the region. Abandoned settlements discovered in remote locations, always evacuated shortly before authorities could investigate. Local newspapers occasionally reference these discoveries, usually under headlines such as "Maroon Camp Found Abandoned" or "Fugitives Elude Capture in Mountains." The most significant report came in October 1847, when a hunting party from Tennessee claimed to have encountered armed men guarding a mountain pass near the North Carolina border. The hunters described being turned back by not less than 15 colored men, well armed with rifles and moving with military discipline. The leader of this group was described as a tall man of commanding presence, wearing a coat of fine quality despite its evident age, who spoke as one educated. This description matches what little is known about Isaiah Brooks. More notable is what the hunters claimed this man said to them: "These upper kingdoms are forbidden to you. Return to the world below and tell others that the mountains now have a watchful master." By 1848, reports of these encounters had decreased significantly. A letter from the sheriff of Buncombe County to the governor of North Carolina, dated December 1848, suggests why. The mountain settlements reported in previous correspondence appear to have relocated beyond our jurisdiction, possibly into the most remote regions of Tennessee or Kentucky. No reports of theft or confrontation have been filed in the past 6 months. The official record falls largely silent after this point. The Civil War soon diverted attention from isolated reports of fugitive slave communities. After the war, as the region began to develop more rapidly, the story of Isaiah Brooks and his mountain kingdom faded into local legend. Yet fragments of the story persisted in oral histories of both white and black families in the region. Folklorist Rebecca Harding, who collected Appalachian stories in the early 1900s, recorded several accounts from elderly residents who claimed that even into the 1870s, travelers in certain remote areas would leave small offerings, tobacco, salt, or tools, at specific locations along trails. This practice, they claimed, would ensure safe passage through territories still controlled by the Mountain King and his people. More substantial evidence emerged in 1934 when a civilian conservation corps team constructing what would become the Blue Ridge Parkway uncovered the remains of a settlement deep in a rhododendron thicket near the current Craggy Gardens Visitor Center. According to the project foreman's report, they discovered stone foundations for multiple structures, a small cemetery containing 14 graves, marked only with initials carved into stones, and a collection of handmade tools and implements buried in a wooden chest. Most intriguing was a leather-bound journal found sealed in a tin box beneath one of the foundations. The journal, which was transferred to the University of North Carolina's archives, contained entries spanning from 1844 to 1852. The handwriting matched that attributed to Isaiah Brooks in the earlier discovered ledger. The journal was written in a coded script that has never been fully deciphered, though scholars who have studied it believe it may be a modified form of Pitman shorthand, combined with West African symbolic elements. The few passages that have been translated suggest that by the late 1840s, Isaiah's community had grown to include not only the original escaped slaves from Caldwell's plantation, but other fugitives and possibly even disenfranchised whites and Native Americans pushed from their lands. The final deciphered entry, dated June 1852, reads, "We number 42 souls now. The lower world believes us myths or ghosts. We are neither. We have become what they fear most, free people living beyond their reach or comprehension. The Master's bones watch over our counsel. His spirit serves us now, as it should be." What ultimately became of Isaiah Brooks and his mountain community remains unknown. No further official reports document their existence. By the time systematic logging and development reached the highest peaks of the Black Mountain Range in the late 19th century, no trace of the settlements remained beyond stone foundations and the occasional artifact, a handmade tool, an unusual carving, fragments of metalwork of distinctive design. Yet the mountains hold their secrets. Hikers and backcountry campers in the Mount Mitchell State Park occasionally report strange experiences, the sensation of being watched, glimpses of movement where no trails exist, the sound of distant metallic hammering carried on the wind. Park rangers dismiss these as the natural sounds of the forest or the product of overactive imaginations spurred by the many ghost stories associated with the region. More difficult to dismiss are the occasional discoveries still made in the most remote sections of the park. Stone cairns arranged in distinctive patterns, small collections of objects, coins, buttons, fragments of iron, placed in the hollows of old trees, and crude symbols carved into rocks at certain overlooks and trail junctions. In 1968, Dr. Harold Winters, whose earlier research had uncovered many of the historical documents relating to the Caldwell plantation, disappeared while conducting field research in the area north of Craggy Gardens. His backpack and research materials were found neatly arranged beside a small stream, but no trace of Winters himself was ever discovered. The official report concluded he had wandered off trail and suffered a fatal accident, his body concealed by the dense undergrowth or carried away by predators. Winters' research notes, recovered with his belongings, indicate he had been following what he believed to be evidence of settlements even more remote than those previously documented. His final journal entry reads, "The pattern of symbols leads further up than I expected. Tomorrow I will attempt to reach the high ridge where the old hunting maps marked Kingdom Come. Local guides refuse to accompany me, citing superstition about the area. Scientific inquiry cannot be deterred by mountain folklore." And so the story of Isaiah Brooks, the slave who killed his master and built a kingdom in the mountains, fades into the mist that so often shrouds the peaks of western North Carolina. Official history has no place for it. Academic studies find insufficient evidence to draw firm conclusions. The forest has reclaimed most physical traces. Yet on certain nights, when the wind blows down from Mount Mitchell and through the valleys of Buncombe County, some say you can hear sounds that don't belong to the natural world. The rhythmic striking of metal on metal, voices raised in songs whose words are no longer remembered, and sometimes, carrying above it all, what sounds like a single voice speaking with authority and purpose. The older families in the region still warn their children not to venture too deep into certain hollows. Some still leave small offerings at specific places along the hiking trails, not out of conscious memory of Isaiah Brooks, but out of a tradition handed down through generations. Always show respect when you walk the high ridges. The mountains have a master, and his kingdom still stands in the secret places where the mist never clears. The Blue Ridge Parkway now winds through what was once Caldwell's property. Tourists stop at overlooks and visitor centers, unaware they stand on ground where one man's defiance created a legend. The mountains keep their secrets well. But for those who know how to listen, the story of Isaiah Brooks continues to echo among the ancient peaks of Appalachia. A whispered reminder that even in the darkest chapters of American history, resistance found its way to the high places, where freedom could be glimpsed if never fully recorded. Visitors to the region often dismiss these stories as typical Appalachian folklore. Academics point to the lack of conclusive documentation. Forest rangers attribute unusual experiences to natural phenomena, yet something about this particular story persists with unusual tenacity, refusing to fade entirely into myth like so many other local legends. In 1972, an archaeological survey conducted by the University of Tennessee investigated several sites in the Black Mountain Range where stone foundations had been reported. Their findings, published in the Journal of Appalachian Studies in 1974, confirmed the existence of at least 3 settlement sites dating to the mid-19th century, all located above 5,000 feet elevation. The construction methods showed distinctive features not typical of Appalachian frontier architecture of the period, including stone floors in some structures and evidence of sophisticated water management systems. Most notable among their findings was a collection of iron implements recovered from one site, tools modified from their original purposes into unfamiliar forms. According to the metallurgical analysis included in the report, many of these tools showed evidence of skilled blacksmithing techniques more advanced than typically found in rural 19th century communities. The report speculated that someone in the settlement had received formal training in metalworking, possibly during previous enslavement on a plantation with specialized craft production. The most puzzling artifact recovered was an iron medallion, approximately 3 inches in diameter, bearing an intricate design that combined elements resembling West African Adinkra symbols with motifs common to 19th century American decorative arts. According to the report, the medallion appeared to have been cast rather than hammered, suggesting access to more sophisticated metallurgical techniques than would typically be available in an isolated mountain community. The archaeological report might have garnered more attention had it not been for its limited distribution and the subsequent controversy that effectively buried its findings. 2 months after publication, the lead archaeologist, Dr. Margaret Carver, issued a formal retraction of several key conclusions, citing methodological errors in dating techniques and insufficient comparative analysis. Her colleagues were surprised by this retraction, particularly given the meticulous methodology described in the original paper. The reason for this sudden change emerged years later, when Carver's personal correspondence was donated to the university archives after her death in 1995. In letters to a colleague, she described receiving significant pressure from certain influential families in western North Carolina to downplay her findings. One letter specifically mentioned a visit from representatives of the Caldwell Foundation, a philanthropic organization with substantial investments in tourism development throughout the region. According to Carver's letters, the Foundation representatives expressed concern that publicizing evidence of a long-term maroon community in the mountains would unnecessarily complicate the historical narrative of the region and potentially impact tourism. The implication that prominent local families might have ancestors who had been involved in obscuring or even violently opposing Isaiah's community was, in the words of one representative quoted by Carver, not conducive to the harmonious cultural identity we're trying to foster. The Caldwell Foundation does not appear in any public registry of non-profits, and attempts by later researchers to locate records of its activities have proven unsuccessful. However, the name Caldwell remains attached to several businesses, streets, and landmarks throughout western North Carolina, though no direct descendants of Jonathan Caldwell have been publicly identified. The suppression of Carver's research might have been the end of academic inquiry into Isaiah Brooks and his mountain kingdom, were it not for a series of unusual discoveries that began in the summer of 1988. A severe drought that year led to unprecedented wildfires throughout the Blue Ridge Mountains. As firefighters and conservation teams worked to contain the blazes and subsequently assess the damage, they gained access to areas of the backcountry normally obscured by dense vegetation. In a remote valley, approximately 9 miles northeast of the Craggy Gardens Visitor Center, a fire management team discovered what appeared to be an extensive complex of stone foundations, partially revealed where the fire had cleared away decades of accumulated forest debris, according to their report filed with the U.S. Forest Service but never publicly released. The site covered approximately 5 acres and included evidence of at least 22 distinct structures arranged in concentric circles. At the center of these circles stood a single large stone, not a natural boulder but a quarried monolith approximately 8 feet tall, with a flat face bearing deeply incised markings. Photographs included with the report show what appear to be letters or symbols arranged in rows, though erosion had rendered many of them illegible. Those that remained visible do not correspond to any known alphabet, though some scholars who have examined the photographs suggest similarities to a cipher system reportedly used by certain abolitionist groups to communicate regarding the Underground Railroad. Most significant was what the team found beneath the central stone. When Forest Service archaeologists excavated the area, they discovered a small chamber lined with flat stones. Within this chamber was a metal box, severely corroded but still intact. Inside the box lay a leather-bound journal, a gold pocket watch, and a collection of personal items, including a set of brass buttons bearing the insignia of a Virginia military academy, a signet ring with the Caldwell family crest, and a folded document that appeared to be a plantation deed. The journal, according to the report, was written in the same coded script as the one discovered in 1934. Unlike the earlier journal, however, this one included several pages in plain English. These pages, photographed and included in the report's appendix, appear to be a formal declaration beginning with the words, "To those who may discover this record in years hence, know that on this day, April 24th in the year 1844, a new covenant was established in these high places. What was taken by force below has been reclaimed by justice above." The declaration goes on to describe how Jonathan Caldwell was compelled to bear witness to the founding of a new society before being consigned to eternal service as guardian of our boundaries. The exact meaning of this phrase is unclear, though it corresponds disturbingly with the skull found on the altar described in Charles Webber's journal from 1846. The most revealing passage comes near the end of the declaration. "I, Isaiah Brooks, born in bondage in Albemarle County, Virginia, in the year 1818, educated in secret by my first master's daughter against her father's will, sold south for the crime of literacy, do hereby establish this mountain kingdom as a place of refuge for all who seek freedom from the tyranny below. Our laws are few. None shall own another. All shall contribute according to ability. Wisdom shall be our only hierarchy. The secrets of this place shall never be shared with those who would destroy it. Any who breach this covenant will join the Master in his eternal service." The document is signed Isaiah Brooks in a formal hand, followed by the marks or signatures of 5 other individuals, presumably the original slaves from Caldwell's mountain camp. The Forest Service report indicates that all items discovered at the site were catalogued and transferred to the regional office in Atlanta for further analysis and appropriate disposition. However, subsequent inquiries by researchers have failed to locate these artifacts in any federal repository. According to internal memoranda obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests in 2003, the items were transferred to a specialized facility in 1989. No record of this facility's location or institutional affiliation has been discovered. The site itself was marked for environmental rehabilitation following the archaeological assessment. When independent researchers attempted to locate it again in the mid-1990s, they found the area had been extensively replanted and landscaped, obliterating many of the features documented in the original report. Forest Service maps now mark the area simply as Ecological Restoration Zone, no public access. Despite official reluctance to acknowledge or preserve evidence of Isaiah's community, stories continued to circulate among both local residents and visitors to the region. By the early 2000s, several unofficial websites and online forums had emerged dedicated to documenting encounters and sightings in what they termed Kingdom Territory, the remote areas of the Black Mountain Range beyond maintained trails. These accounts follow remarkably consistent patterns. Hikers who stray from marked paths describe encountering stone cairns arranged in specific configurations. Those who continue past these markers often report a sensation of being observed, followed by various auditory experiences, rhythmic tapping sounds, distant voices in conversation, or in some cases, a single commanding voice instructing them to return to the lower world. Most dismiss these experiences as imagination enhanced by knowledge of local legends. Others attribute them to fellow hikers or Forest Service personnel. A few insist they represent genuine encounters with what one online commentator described as the guardians of Isaiah's kingdom, whether human, spiritual, or something in between. In 2007, the Appalachian Oral History Project conducted interviews with elderly residents of the most remote communities in Buncombe and Yancey counties. One interview subject, Elijah Carter, then 93 years old, and identified as a descendant of free black settlers who came to the region after the Civil War, provided an account passed down through his family. My great-grandfather told how when they first came up to these mountains in 1870, looking to homestead, they were approached by men who seemed to appear from nowhere in the forest. These men didn't threaten them, but made it clear certain areas were already claimed. They spoke of a community living higher up that had been there for decades. Great-granddaddy said they were invited to visit this place once, led up trails that seemed to disappear behind them. He described coming to a high valley where people lived in sturdy houses with gardens and workshops. Said they had ways of working metal he'd never seen before and systems for growing food in the short mountain seasons. What struck him most was how they governed themselves. No single leader giving orders, but a council of elders who made decisions together. At the center of their meeting place stood what he described as a throne, but no one sat in it. Instead, it held a skull adorned with metalwork and feathers. They called it the Master, and said it reminded them of the world they'd left behind and why they must never return to it. Great-granddaddy's family was welcome to settle nearby, but told never to reveal the location of the higher settlement to outsiders. They kept that promise. Even when timber companies came offering money for information about the back valleys, our people stayed silent. Some secrets are worth keeping. Carter's account is one of the few oral histories that provides details about the internal organization of Isaiah's community from someone claimed to have actually visited it. The description of consensus-based governance contrasts sharply with the hierarchical kingdom described in earlier accounts, suggesting either that the community evolved over time or that outside observers misinterpreted what they saw through the lens of their own cultural expectations. The most recent documented investigation into the legacy of Isaiah Brooks came in 2013, when Dr. Amara Wilson, a professor of anthropology specializing in maroon communities throughout the Americas, attempted to conduct field research in the areas associated with the legend. Her research proposal to the National Science Foundation described a multidisciplinary approach combining archaeological survey, archival research, and comparative analysis with better documented maroon societies in places like Jamaica, Brazil, and Suriname. Wilson's grant was approved, but her project encountered immediate obstacles. According to her field notes, published in a limited academic circulation after she abandoned the project, landowner permissions were inexplicably withdrawn after initially being granted. Equipment malfunctioned consistently in certain areas. Most concerning, her research team reported feeling unwelcome in local communities and occasionally followed during their preliminary surveys. The final entry in Wilson's published field notes describes a disturbing experience that led to her decision to terminate the project. Final attempt to access Site C today. Equipment failure again. GPS shows obvious errors, placing us sometimes miles from our actual location. As we attempted to navigate by compass, we began to hear metallic tapping sounds from multiple directions. The pattern seemed deliberate, almost like a code. When we continued forward, we found our path blocked by a carefully constructed barrier of fallen trees that had not been there during yesterday's aerial survey. Most disturbing was the discovery of a small metal object placed conspicuously on a tree stump near the barrier. An iron medallion virtually identical to the one described in the 1974 Tennessee Archaeological report, which should be impossible given that the original is supposedly in federal custody. The medallion was warm to the touch, despite the cool ambient temperature. Upon returning to base camp, we found our tents undisturbed, but every digital storage device, laptops, phones, cameras, external drives, had been wiped completely clean of data. No physical evidence of intrusion was apparent. Local authorities suggested a lightning strike or other electrical phenomenon could explain the data loss, though there was no storm activity in the area. After consultation with university administration and consideration of safety concerns, I am terminating the field research portion of this project, effective immediately. Some doors are clearly meant to remain closed. Wilson subsequently redirected her research to focus on better documented maroon communities in other regions. When contacted by later researchers interested in her experience, she declined to elaborate beyond her published notes, stating only that some historical questions involve costs that outweigh potential academic benefits. And so the story of Isaiah Brooks and his mountain kingdom remains in the liminal space between documented history and folklore. Official records acknowledge the disappearance of Jonathan Caldwell and his slaves in 1844, but offer no conclusive explanation. Archaeological evidence confirms the existence of unusual settlements in the high elevations of the Black Mountain Range, but has been systematically removed from public access. Oral histories provide tantalizing details, but cannot be independently verified. For most visitors who drive the scenic Blue Ridge Parkway or hike the maintained trails of Mount Mitchell State Park, the legend is simply another colorful piece of regional folklore, if they hear it at all. Park brochures and official histories make no mention of Isaiah Brooks or the community he allegedly established. The plaques at scenic overlooks describe the natural features and general history of European settlement, with perhaps a brief acknowledgement of the Cherokee who inhabited the region before them. The story of the slave who killed his master and built a kingdom in the mountains has no place in this sanitized narrative. Yet for those who venture off the marked paths, who climb to the highest, most remote ridges where the rhododendron grows thick and the mist rarely lifts, there remains a sense that they are not alone, that eyes watch from the dense undergrowth, that the metallic sounds carried on the wind are not merely natural phenomena, that the stone cairns arranged in curious patterns serve as boundaries between worlds. Some visitors to these remote areas report a final, chilling detail. At certain points along unmarked ridgelines, where the forest opens briefly to reveal spectacular views of the valleys below, they have discovered crude symbols carved into the bark of ancient trees. According to those who have photographed these markings, they resemble the letters I and B intertwined with what appears to be a crown. Beneath these symbols, observers have often found small offerings placed in hollow spaces between roots, coins, buttons, strips of cloth, occasionally more valuable items like rings or watches. Local hiking guides, when asked about these offerings, typically change the subject. But one, speaking on condition of anonymity to a travel blogger in 2018, offered this explanation. Folks around here know some places belong to the Mountain King. Been that way since before my grandfather's time. We leave tokens to show respect when we pass through his territory, not out of superstition, mind you, but because it's the right thing to do. Isaiah won his freedom fair, built something that lasted, kept his people safe when the whole world was against them. That deserves remembrance, even if the history books try to erase it. The guide added, "Some say his descendants still live up there, watching over the boundaries of the kingdom. Others say Isaiah himself never died, that he found some way to extend his life through means best not discussed. Me, I don't claim to know, but I'll tell you this. In all my years guiding in these mountains, I've seen things that don't have easy explanations, heard voices that don't belong to any living person I know, and felt the presence of something powerful watching from just beyond the edge of sight. "One thing's for certain," the guide concluded. "When the mist rolls down from those high ridges and the wind carries sounds that make your skin prickle, it's best to leave an offering, turn around, and head back to the world below." Some kingdoms aren't meant for visitors, and some kings still guard their hard-won territories, even after all these years. And so the legend persists, whispered around campfires, discussed in hushed tones in the small museums and historical societies of western North Carolina, debated on obscure internet forums dedicated to unsolved historical mysteries. Isaiah Brooks, slave, rebel, ruler of a hidden kingdom, continues to cast a long shadow across the mist-shrouded peaks of the Black Mountains. Perhaps the most fitting epitaph for this elusive historical figure comes from an anonymous poem found scratched into the wall of a cave near the Tennessee border, discovered by hikers in 1997 and dated simply 1865. "The master serves in bones and dust, his kingdom stands on high, where freedom found a mountain throne beneath an open sky. What chains once bound these hands of mine now bind him to his fate, to guard for all eternity his kingdom's hidden gate." Whether Isaiah Brooks was a flesh-and-blood man who created a remarkable maroon community in one of the most inhospitable environments in the eastern United States, or whether he has evolved into a regional folk hero bearing the projected hopes and fears of multiple generations, his story reminds us that the official historical record is always incomplete, always, subject to the biases and limitations of those who create and preserve it. For those with eyes to see and ears to hear, the true history of America often lies not in textbooks and official archives, but in the persistent whispers that rise from the land itself. Stories of resistance and resilience that refuse to be silenced, echoing across centuries like the metallic tapping sounds that hikers sometimes hear in the remote hollows of the Black Mountain Range, where the kingdom of Isaiah Brooks may still stand, hidden in plain sight, ruled by a slave who refused to remain enslaved. The Blue Ridge Parkway winds on. Tourists snap photos at scenic overlooks, hikers follow maintained trails, the busy world below continues its relentless progress. But in the highest, most remote corners of those ancient mountains, where mist clings to the rhododendron and shadows seem to move with purpose among the towering trees, the boundary between history and legend dissolves like morning dew. And somewhere, perhaps, Isaiah watches from his mountain throne, master now of his own destiny, keeper of secrets that the world below has tried and failed to erase.